Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today and for coming along for the session, which is part of Yuki's Games Insight Month. And today's talk is titled No One Taught Me How to Lead, the Games Industry's Blind Spot. And there are a number of reasons that I want to talk about this topic. And I'm going to start with a statement that I'd love for you to just sit with for a moment and take in. And that is, we are an industry of accidental leaders. And of course, there are always exceptions to the rule, but in my experience, many people in the games industry who got into a leadership position didn't get into making games because they wanted to manage people. We got here because we loved making things, building worlds, telling stories, and solving creative challenges, and that's what pulled us in. And yet, somewhere along the way, many of us found ourselves leading teams and building businesses and trying to guide others without even being shown how to do all of those things. And everywhere you look, a lot of people will have views on how to run a game studios and definitely lots of views on how to make a game itself and what makes a game good. But the truth is that a lot of those views that are shared aren't always shared by people that have actively done those things. So there's a lot of advice out there. There's a lot of consumer feedback coming our way, but very little discussion happening by people that are actively making games. And the cost of all of this, the cost of having an industry built by accidental leaders, is often very invisible at first. But I challenge that our last 18 months, we've started to see the cracks and the true cost of what that means to our craft. And so the true cost of ignoring leadership in our studios is that it shows up over lost time, lost talent, and lost trust. And it shows up in burnout, in turnover, in projects that fail, not because the ideas weren't good, but because the internal structures weren't there to hold them up. And I say this not from a place of criticism, but from experience myself, firsthand, from having watched the industry back itself into the corner that we are now in. And I've also lived this. I've found myself in leadership roles that I wasn't prepared for. And I looked for answers and guidance and training to help support myself with what was taking place. And I just couldn't find anything suitable. Nobody taught me how to lead, and nobody taught me how to manage the conflict that comes with leadership. And as a result, every mistake cost me something, a little trust, a little confidence, and a little time that could have been better spent building something elsewhere. And I slowly started to realize that I was learning often more by making mistakes than actually learning. But more importantly, that leadership itself wasn't just about having this skill set or ticking off a checklist, but it was something that I was actively building as I went every day with every decision and discussion that I was having and making. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you all about today, not just the gaps we're facing as an industry, but the opportunity that we have right now to start to do things a little differently. But before we dive any deeper into that, I should probably introduce myself. So my name is Melissa Phillips. You can call me Mel. I'm the Director of Games Leadership, and I've spent a lot of time in the games industry working in roles such as head of studio, head of operations, operations director, and navigating all of that messy, beautiful, stressful, and inspiring parts of leading creative teams. And alongside that, I'm also a qualified coach and psychologist, which means that I spend a lot of time helping others build healthier relationships with their teams, their role, and also, very importantly, with themselves. And like I mentioned earlier, I've absolutely been in those moments where leadership felt overwhelming, where I didn't feel like I had the tools that I needed. And honestly, didn't like that, wasn't a big fan of it. And I pride myself on being this very kind of capable, practical person who's worked in the industry for a long time, and I should know better. So when leadership felt messy to me, it started to make me curious as to what else it might look like. What was I getting wrong? How do I fix this? And what would happen if, as an industry, we had more support and discussions around some of those challenges? And that curiosity has shaped kind of everything that I now do today. So for the past few years, I've dedicated myself to learning, exploring, and supporting what active leadership looks like in the games industry. So my own company, Games Leadership, was created out of a belief that if we can support leaders to lead well, then we don't just make better games, we make better careers, we make better cultures, and ultimately maybe a better games industry, a more sustainable industry than I think we are currently experiencing. And so with this kind of mixture of active experience and my psychological background, and what I can only describe as being an obsession to understand what is happening with our industry, I've started to translate all of these into learnings and more kind of structured training, coaching, and community spaces. So we help people all across the industry navigate different aspects of leadership, whether that's running a studio, stepping up into management for the first time, or maybe rehabbing some of that unwanted behavior that we see, or just trying to figure out how to show up and be better for the team. And my hope for today is that you leave this session just feeling a little more seen, a little more equipped, and maybe even a little more hopeful about what leadership can look like in our industry. And if nothing else, then I hope you walk away knowing that if leadership has ever felt messy or hard for you, then that is absolutely, completely normal, and actually part of the process often. So I've got two main goals and objectives for you today. And the first is for us to explore how leadership is something that you actively have to build. It's a concept and not a thing that we can just easily pick up. And second, I would like us to start to recognize the impact of different leadership behaviors and what we might do as leaders to help make these small shifts and create change in our studios. But before I do any of that, let's answer the ultimate question, which is, why does any of this matter at all? Well, there are a few reasons. And I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here, but bear with me. Making games is hard. And people say this all the time, making games is hard, but often it's not in the way that we talk about. We're not doing brain surgery. We're making art. We're telling stories. We're building worlds. And we're doing this in real meaningful ways. And it takes time, dedication, and often a willingness to work. And this is the kicker, without any certainty of success. So when we set out to make a game, we can't predict how it's going to be received. We pour everything into it, knowing that the outcome is actually never guaranteed. And often all the way through of creating something, and any creator will know this, that, they have to manage this feeling of uncertainty as to how it's going to be received. And then if we add into the last 18 months of what's been happening in the games industry, that uncertainty about creating art feels even more challenging and unsettling and scary in many cases, because we've seen brilliant studios that made great games, and studios that seemingly made all of the right moves and created successful franchises and win awards. They still lost funding and had to close. So here's where I'm feeling a little bit brutal. The reason that happened, the reason why seemingly great studios are failing, isn't because they didn't have good ideas, or there wasn't enough funding, or there wasn't enough great talent or business capability in this industry. It's because we didn't build for sustainability as an industry. We didn't favor sustainability. And to be super clear, that's actually not in the hands of our studio founders or development team leaders. It's actually the system. The model on how we pitch, fund, and make games is ultimately broken because it doesn't allow for that favor of stability and sustainability. So I want to tell you that it's not your fault if you're a developer trying to start a studio or working in a studio to create fantastic experiences. None of this is your fault. Making a game and building a sustainable studio are also two completely different challenges. And often the priorities for those two worlds pull against each other. You've got creative freedom versus commercial pressure. You've got team well-being versus maybe delivering deadlines. And the system in which we fund studios and make these games is what's broken around that, because it can force sometimes building a studio, making a game, to brush up against one another and create friction. And whilst there is no magic formula that can protect us completely against this, What is happening now is an opportunity to start to talk more about how those different pieces come together, because we can't keep hiding behind this excuse. And I hear it all the time, but Mel, we're a young industry, like we just don't know how to do all of this all at once, and we're still figuring it out. But the truth is, we are old enough now to know better, and we should start putting some of these findings and learnings back into the system, and making some change. So the good news, because there is good news, is that I believe a new generation is coming, and I don't mean just in age. I mean in terms of studio leadership, because I'm seeing founders, I'm seeing designers, studio heads right now who are starting to implement change and do things differently in their studios, who want to build more sustainability and humanity at its core, and who are ready to challenge some of these old assumptions and regenerate how we build teams and make games. And so if you're part of that already, thank you in advance. We love to see it. But the starting point here is to recognize that leadership isn't a side job or something that we can figure out later. It's actually the foundation of which everything else is built for that studio. And we've already got so much else going on, like in order to figure out how to make that game. But if we're not actively paying attention to how we lead, if we leave that part to chance, then we're already giving away too much in our studios. So if we accept that leadership is something that we have to actively build, then it's worth asking, well, what happens if we don't? What happens when we don't actively build our leadership awareness? And I've worked with now over 300 games industry leaders over the past 2 years, and I keep seeing the same patterns emerge. Because when nobody teaches you how to lead, when you're trying to build something without any support on how to lead the people building it, then you're going to have to end up relying on instinct, habit, or whatever you've seen done before. And in the games industry, that is creating patterns that I see again and again across studios of all different sizes. And again, I want to be super clear here that this isn't because people don't care or don't want to lead in a healthy way. It's simply because they haven't been taught. So today, I just want to walk you through 5 of the most common blind spots that I see in studios, so that if you do recognize yourself in any of those, then you can start to get maybe a bit more curious about what's happening and explore some of the options around them. And again, just to reassure you that if you do recognize yourself in any of these, that's actually a good thing. It means that you're paying attention. It means that you're already starting to name where the gaps might be in your studio. And later on in this talk, we'll discuss about what you can start to do if you do notice that. So this is just a quick overview of some of the outcomes that we tend to see in leaders who find themselves in a leadership position where they feel uncertain. Again, want to stress that this is happening in the games industry for lots of different reasons. I mentioned earlier that leadership by default or accidental leadership is something that we see a lot of. Either everyone else has left, perhaps, and now you are the most senior person, or perhaps you've shown the most interest in the role and you get given that, or you've got the most experience, or maybe you've just been at the company the longest. That's how a lot of traditional game studios have kind of handed out leadership positions. And that said, leadership titles are often also considered a badge of honor in studios. So people are actively seeking out these opportunities. Sometimes we're not so reluctant, or avoidant. And sometimes the games industry has also done this weird thing where we need to achieve that lead title or that senior title in order to be able to make the move beyond it. So, for example, the role of creative director often relies on you having some sort of leadership experience, whether or not you intended to go into people management. So we're kind of forcing people through these career pathways that perhaps aren't something that they choose to be doing. So when I hear this phrase, no one taught me how to lead, it comes from a number of different places. And sometimes it's feeling unsupported, sometimes it's feeling frustrated, annoyed perhaps of the need to have to do this. And some might also be wanting to find solutions and be curious about what they can do better, but they're not sure about what's going to move the team forward. And so I thought it might be helpful to look at some of the ways in which this can affect our leadership and the associated behaviors and thought patterns that come out of these. So we have no one taught me how to lead, so I avoid it altogether. No one taught me how to lead, so I do it, but I do it resentfully. No one taught me how to lead, so I outsource and control it. And nobody taught me how to lead, so I cling to control and I create fear. And then I've thrown in the most common and perhaps slightly more positive one, which is no one taught me how to lead, so I'm just trying my best to figure it out. And these are pretty self-explanatory, but let me just quickly whiz through each one. So first up, we've got avoidance. This is sometimes when leadership feels overwhelming, scary, or just unfamiliar. Then we do what humans naturally do with scary things. We avoid it. We back away from the hard conversations. We become less visible. And we try and stick to what we know, which is shipping the game, managing tasks, and maybe quietly hoping that all the people stuff, the other stuff, the studio stuff, might just somehow sort itself all out without us. Next outcome is about resentful leadership. This is often seen where somebody steps into a leadership role, maybe because they were the last person standing, or that they were just the most experienced, or it was the only way to move up. But deep down, they don't really want to be doing it. They don't really feel comfortable with the title. They want to normally in games be making something, or having that creative side. They want to be in the craft, the writing, the designing, the building. But now they're managing instead. And so they show up, they lead, they perform the role, but there's this kind of low-level frustration running underneath it. And when that starts to leak out, even unintentionally, it shows up in some very common ways, such as like not having time for the team, maybe being short with people, feeling like everything is a drain, or just that kind of sense of like, I didn't sign up for this, so I'm not actually fully committed. Next one is very sneaky, very common in fast-growing studios. So a founder or director might say something like, look, I don't want to deal with all this management stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring somebody in for this that's going to do that. And that is not a bad instinct. Leadership absolutely should be shared. We should be outsourcing, the things that we're not great at. If we can find somebody that is and loves it, even better. But the issue is that often when we outsource too quickly or without alignment, we end up with this kind of weird vacuum of responsibility. So one person now thinks that they're in charge of culture, maybe, but then another one is thinking that they're going to be handling team growth. Maybe another one is looking at budget and managing headcount. So these kind of responsibilities of leadership get handed out to different roles. And in doing so, often those power dynamics become really unclear. So suddenly very loud personalities can take up space, decisions might become inconsistent, and the people who thought they were being helpful are now holding power that they were never trained to use or expected to have. So outsourcing leadership without holding on to your responsibility can ultimately lead to chaos. You can share leadership, you just can't abdicate it. No one taught me how to lead, so I cling to control and create fear. Control is a big one whenever we talk about leadership and power. It's a word that often comes out. And it's often something that we see when we don't feel confident in our leadership. Some of us will try and grip everything a little too tightly, and we'll all be guilty of this at some point where we're like, well, if I just control everything and review every single detail, question every decision, then nothing will ever get past me. And that's exactly what happens. You become a bottleneck for every sign off because in uncertainty, that control feels safe. But in practice, controlling every single little tiny detail, that micromanagement also kills creativity. So your team stops bringing new ideas. They stop speaking up. Maybe everything kind of grinds to a halt where it has to push through you. And ultimately, that is just going to burn you out because the whole system is now freezing behind you. And when I see this, one of the hardest parts is that this often happens to leaders who really, really care deeply about what they are making. They're actually trying their best to protect the project and do right by it and right by others. But the studio starts to run on this fear instead of trust because everybody's knowing that they have to get it through you first. And then, of course, there's the final fifth one, the one I hear all the time in one-to-one coaching and workshops. And this is, I don't really know what I'm doing, so I am just trying my best. And I hope that's enough. I hope that's okay. Um, and this one does feel most hopeful to me. If you can shift your mindset and your leadership into getting this kind of mindset, then that does start to open up a lot more room for actual leadership development to start taking place. So often when we work with leaders, we try and encourage this, like, are you doing your best? Are you trying? Are you showing up every day? And let's talk about that, because if we can kind of get that mindset, then change can start to happen. And for me, this is the one that kind of helps to set up that seed for a more sustainable games industry. If we could all kind of get into this mindset, then maybe we can start to put in new changes and get more curious. And I realize that this can also feel very frustrating, because we're in an industry where also trying your best also doesn't guarantee success. So I know a lot of people feel, I guess, stuck and frustrated by that. But that's a wider issue with the industry that we can talk about another time. So what's working? I want us to just take a breath, because whilst there's a lot that we need to change, I also want to recognize what's getting better. And I've just walked you through some of the harder patterns that I see in leadership, but I want to take a moment and kind of shift the energy and maybe bring some better vibes, because there is so much good happening in the industry too. So I want to talk about what is actually working. And there are studios right now, maybe even yours, where something is starting to shift, where people are getting more intentional about how they lead, where conversations are happening earlier and not only when things are going really wrong. I'm often brought in when things go wrong, but I'm starting to be brought in much earlier, and seeing kind of operational roles and discussions about people management take place a lot sooner. We're starting to see founders as well who are creating studios not just to make great games, but to foster a business where people are going to feel heard and important in that space, where the work is getting valued, and leadership is being kind of thoughtfully considered right from the beginning. It's not an afterthought or that reserved for those in management positions. We're actually kind of seeing it being spread out amongst the team, and decisions and problem solving becoming a kind of team sport. And that's happening. I've seen it. There are the beginnings of more sustainable studios starting to poke through. I work very closely with a number of new startups, and I think one of the biggest shifts that I'm noticing is that there is still a tendency to reject traditional rigid leadership structures. As indies, we've been doing that for quite a long time. A lot of independent studios were created to kind of move away from AAA. And there's this kind of rejection of these rigid leadership structures. But instead of throwing everything out, studios are now kind of choosing what to build in their place. So previously, a lot of indie studios were just kind of avoiding anything that felt too corporate. And as a result, working in indie spaces often felt a bit lawless, like Wild West. But that's kind of changing now. And I'm starting to see studios make space for better business planning, and they're putting time into people management structures. And I've even worked with a few indies recently who have dedicated learning and development budgets, which I think is fantastic. It's great to see, and would have been unheard of 5 years ago. So studios are starting to try to do something different. And not every experiment is going to work, and that's okay. What matters is that dev teams are getting curious about this, and they're asking new questions, they're trying new things, and they're starting to approach kind of making games with new priorities. It's not just about making a cool thing. There's a lot of other moving parts. So, and just to give you a flavor of what I think is really working in studios right now, these are just a few signs that I keep seeing. These are all kind of big green flags to me, and it's likely that your studio might be doing some of these, if not all of them already, which is great. Keep that up. That's great. Um, so what's working? I'm seeing leaders carve out meaningful check-in times with their team members, not just status updates, but actual conversations that are more focused on both team and individual progress. So we're getting to understand what's the individual expertise, wants, and needs of my team. And that's making a big difference. People feel seen, problems are getting raised earlier, trust is building slowly but steadily, and there's a more connective feeling within Game Studio. And this leads to more team retrospectives. I do bang on about retrospectives quite a lot. Because I think you either love or hate them. I'm aware I'm from a production operational background, so I'm going to probably be in favor. But studios are actually reviewing processes and having retrospectives at milestone points in order to review like what's working and what's not working, and then actually addressing those problems. So hearing team member ideas and concerns, and then problem solving the next steps. And again, working in the indie space, this is something that sometimes we neglect and we don't do enough of. We often feel blocked by, say, resource, time, money. It's all kind of things that we have to take into consideration within the budget of the game. But I am seeing time being carved out for these retrospectives and the team having those discussions on what can we improve with our limited resources. And then this is a big one. I'm seeing more founders, directors, and leads reaching out for coaching, mentoring, or training, not because they're failing, but because they want to grow. So whereas it was often a very kind of lonely experience a number of years ago, we are now starting to see people not power through alone anymore. They're starting to realize that leadership doesn't just happen. Or if it does just happen, that could be a very slow process. But there are new ways of approaching the whole role of studio leadership. There are new spaces that they can talk to and peers that they can kind of share knowledge with. And that is definitely starting to become less taboo. Decision making is also slowly becoming less top down in many places. I mentioned this earlier, like retrospectives are great to kind of start that team feedback space. But I am seeing teams where power is delegated more intentionally with frameworks that make it really clear as to how the decisions are getting made and by whom, why, what, when, where, how. So more shared power. And again, this is a very indie flavor, but it's historically been very hard to achieve this. But I do think we're going to see big changes here in the future where studios are founded not just by one person's individual talent, but more of a group shared expertise. There does seem to be a trend moving towards, well, who's your business person? Who's your creative director? Tell us more about the individual makeup of your team and what does the business look like as well as the game. So I do think we're going to start to see more shared power come through, especially in the indie space. And then finally, I'm also seeing teams looking at how they support the wider team and move everyone forward together. So we're looking at career progression now on a team level with role clarity, training, clearer policies, and processes that look to support those team members at all levels of their career. Previously, a lot of indies were like, we just can't do that. It's not something we can scope. But I do think the future of more sustainable studios, that's going to be starting to be built into the structure of these studios. We're going to see not just the plan for the game, but for the plan for the studio for 5, 10 years plus. And that's exciting to me. So where does that leave us? We've talked about the blind spots, the patterns that we fall into when no one teaches us how to lead. We've seen what's starting to shift, the hopeful signs from studios that are starting to try new things. But a big blocker is that people will say to me, like, well, that sounds great, Mel, but how do I actually start to do this? And you'll already know that a lot of this isn't going to happen instantly. If you're a studio owner, you know that things can take a long time to come through. Again, I'm aware that resources can be super tight and you're spinning lots of plates. But my advice is always that it starts from where you are now and noticing like what resources are available to you. And in some cases, you have to put out the biggest fires that might destroy you first. So what are those? Can we identify those rather than I think a big habit of mine in my past leadership was I would look at all the fire in the room and I would just be so overwhelmed by fire, I wouldn't know where to begin. And my experience has taught me, well, you look for the biggest fires now, which sounds obvious, but in that moment, you're just very easily overwhelmed. So I look for the biggest fires, I identify them, and I look directly into them and I deal with those first. And that takes courage and bravery and awareness and that ability to kind of identify those big problems that might get bigger uh, and actually start to put things in place to deal with those, even if that's scary to us. If I've struck a chord with you today and you're curious about what's next, then there are 3 things I'd like to give you that will help you to identify the options that you have available to you. So name the conversations that you're avoiding. This is my staring into the fire piece. So we're not perfect. And often we're aware of where some of the issues are within our studios. And we just don't want to name them. You don't have to solve them yet. Like, you don't have to. Just name them. Put them down on a piece of paper. What's going unsaid in your team? What feedback are you holding back on? Where are you sidestepping in your role? Where can you feel that? And I know you can feel it. Start to notice where that's showing up and name it. Secondly, I'd like you to look to create space for feedback and reflection. Again, this doesn't have to cost anything in terms of money for a studio. Sometimes it might just be time, and it might be things that you're already doing. So that might be how you're using one-to-ones. Or it might be as simple as just hosting a space where you ask your team, like, what do we need more of? And seeing what they say. And that doesn't have to be formal, like I said, it just has to be bringing more questions into our sprints, into our meetings, and opening up more of a space for this to happen. So look at areas that you can create space for that in those moments. And then lastly, it's about treating your leadership as something that changes and grows. So nobody taught me how to lead is often many of our stories. I hazard a guess most of our games industry leaders. So what now? Leadership often evolves it with your team. It depends on so many nuances within your studio. It's the team itself, it's the game you're making, what changes and what's happening in your life. So your leadership is going to change and adapt multiple times in your career. So too often we get to that stage and we go, well, I'm in that leadership role now, so it's all good and there's nothing that can be taught. But what if it was going to evolve? What if we asked those questions like, what can I do next? And just before I move on, there's a really great book on this, which has helped me, and it's called What Got You Here Won't Get You There by Marshall Goldsmith. And that really captures for me how a lot of leaders get to the role and then stop progressing because it feels like, oh, I'm at the top. But the reality is that we have to constantly update our approaches and get curious about who we are. Who I am tomorrow may not be who I am today. And this is not sponsored by anyone. This is just something that helped me with my own leadership journey. So I give you a moment just to make a note of the book in case you'd like to check it out. Aware we have covered a lot today. We've talked about blind spots. We've looked at the cost of accidental leadership. We've explored what's starting to change. And we've named a few things that you might start to do differently. But if there's one thing that I would like you to take away from all of this, then that would be that leadership is something that you have to actively build. And we keep building on it, not just at the point of promotion, but over and over again in our relationships, in reflection, and in the real world kind of messy way that we make games. It's something that you shape in the conversations that you choose to have, and how you hold the space for your team, and how you respond when things don't go to plan. And we're kind of coming up to the end now, running out of time. But if anything that I've said today has resonated, and if you have seen yourself in some of those patterns, or if you're curious about how your leadership could evolve, then I'm always up for a chat, or an online coffee. I come into London regularly, but I'm also up for a virtual coffee. As I mentioned, I'm from Games Leadership, where we work with leaders at every level of the industry, from first-time managers all the way up to studio founders. And we do this for coaching, training, and community spaces built around this kind of work. So you can find out more about what we do at gamesleadership.com, or feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. And we have a blueprint cohort starting soon. That's our 12-week online training course for leaders in the games industry. So do get in touch if you'd be interested in joining us for that. That's super soon. And if not, then I will say thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I know it can be really busy doing what you do, so really appreciate you taking your lunch and time to reflect, listen, and think maybe a bit differently about leadership with me. I'm going to be sticking around now for any questions. So if there's something that you'd like to ask, please do drop it into the chat. I'm sure we'll have some hands shown. Anything that is maybe too private, you'd like to talk to me privately, again, feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. And we can catch up there. So thank you ever so much. Pass back to, is it Leo?
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Mel. Really, really appreciate it. We do have a couple of questions sort of come through. One's quite interesting actually on the Q&A box there. I mean, they're asking, have you seen studios starting to do reverse mentoring? Is it successful? How do you put it in place? I'll be honest with you, I don't know what reverse
Love
mentoring
this.
is. I can kind of imagine I can imagine what it is, but go for it. Do you want to explain what it is first?
My understanding of reverse mentoring is that we are pairing somebody that's been in industry a long time with somebody that's brand new in the industry, with the hope that the person that has been in the industry the longest is learning from the new person. I believe I think this is great, where I've seen it work really well. And that's kind of where this the kind of new generation of game designer is coming in and wanting to work in a different way to how traditional games industry structures have been set up. And so the hope is, I mean, anything that opens up conversation is really useful. So having conversations about what we both want from this experience that we're having. You know, if we've got to work together, then what do we want? Why am I here? Why are you here? Let's talk about it. That is super healthy, even if what we want is completely different. And maybe we will never see eye to eye, but having that conversation and opening up those relationships is important, because what it allows you to start to do is to understand more about that person. And that's the struggle that I think we have in the industry at the moment, is that we have this kind of want for different ways of working. And I mean, COVID taught us so much about making games remotely. I've been working remotely for the last 15 years, so I did it before it was cool. I knew it was going to work. It's all good, but COVID brought this kind of new way of working into the games industry that many people actually realized how healthy that was for them, and they wanted to continue it. But it does go against those kind of traditional leadership models. And so, yeah, reverse mentoring allows us to understand from the other side's views, and doesn't have to find that perfect, you know, yes, we all agree on this and can move forwards, but it does find a space in which I think people can at least understand and settle on those ideas, and that's important.
Absolutely. No, that's really, really interesting. It's a good way to look at things. So we've got someone in the chat. I won't name names. Suggesting sort of maybe a little bit of imposter syndrome in
Mm-hmm.
their management, but also trying to juggle the fact that they're experiencing that with feeling sort of lost in their own workload. I mean, there's obviously not an awful lot to unpick there. This is someone with a great amount of responsibility, possibly too much. Any suggestions on how they might start sort of trying to work around that at all?
I speak
Things
a
to
lot
consider there.
about, yeah, I speak a lot about imposter syndrome. I hate the term, by the way, hate the term.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, no,
Okay.
no. Not your fault. I can argue about this all day. I mean, the reason that I don't like the word imposter syndrome is that I think uh, we use it to kind of shame ourselves. And I'm sure if I sat down with this individual, I don't know who said it, but if I did sit down with this individual, I bet I could point out all of the ways in which you are stretched and uh, maybe feeling unsupported, or you've got a lot on. There's a lot of overwhelming information coming at you. Making games is a wild experience. Like uh, it's just, this is what I say, like it's hard. We love doing it, but it is hard because there's so many moving parts. And then you add in that making games requires so many different personalities as well. We are an industry that needs those introverts, needs those extroverts, but then we throw them all into a team and we expect everything to work beautifully together and everyone's going to get on. So you're not just navigating making the actual thing, you're also navigating the power dynamics and the political relationships of those around you. Add in office politics and the structure of the studio around you, and stuff that's completely outside of your control but influences your absolute day to day. Things like the budget of this and what the business is bringing in and the success of games, which are all of those are completely outside the control of the team. But no wonder we are stressed. No wonder we are finding it overwhelming, and worrying about whether we're doing the right thing. Um, because also the stakes are high right now. You add in what's been going on with the industry, and there's a lot that can feel very scary. So imposter syndrome, I like to look at it, we find ourselves in a high stakes situation, but we enter with a low sense of self-worth. Um, and in that situation, a lot of that starts with, looking at what we can and can't control. So, you know, what am I responsible for here? Because it's very human. We take on so many other problems from the things around us. And like I said, if I sat down and I showed you all of the pressures that were coming in right now upon you, the answer would be like, no wonder we're all feeling overwhelmed and stressed. I don't know if that's imposter syndrome, so I would challenge it, you see. That's why I don't like the term. It's not an excuse to make you feel ashamed or sad. Um, it's about how do we better support you, and we should be better supporting you as an industry. So a lot of it's not your fault, and we should talk about how we get back onto what you can control and focus on that.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, that makes an awful lot of sense. Okay, we've had a couple of other questions in the chat there. I don't know if you can see the chat box. There's a
Mhm.
couple of long ones. Do someone giving their opinion on what their sort of take on leadership is, sort of defining it more as the sort of difference between knowing when to give people latitude and contribute new ideas and approaches, and knowing when to take hold of the reins a little bit more. I mean, do you agree with this, Mel, and have you sort of encountered examples of this happening in the wild, or do you disagree with
All
it?
the time, all the time. I mean, a lot of what we teach at Games Leadership, surrounds ideas around change management. You're trying to lead in a volatile environment where things are changing all the time. The scope of the game, the money coming in, passing milestones. Maybe you've got a publisher and their demands as well on top of that. Um, we've got a lot of change management happening. There's a lot of negotiation as part of that. I mean, we do a lot of negotiating anyway as humans, like our day-to-day life. We don't realize how much negotiating we have to do. And when we work as a team, this is very different. I often use the example of my grandparents had a shoe shop, and it was the same thing each year. You went and bought the stock at the end of the year for the next year, and then you sold it. And nothing changed. 50 years went by, and it was the same model each time. And we don't have that in our studios. And exactly what this person has pointed out is that there are times where we want to invite new ideas, and there are times where sometimes we have to take the reins and push through. And it is, knowing when to balance that is very difficult. That does come with experience. I do think that comes with experience. But it also comes from having the awareness to realize when we have maybe held the reins too tightly or maybe given too much. I've definitely done this. I've had teams where they're like, we need to know everything. And I'm like, I don't know if you do. And they're like, yeah, we do. So I've shown them everything that I've got. And the response has been, well, we're quitting because that's really scary and you shouldn't have shown us that. So sometimes I've gotten it wrong where I'm like, oh, okay, here you go. This is what you wanted and what you said you wanted. And actually, I shouldn't have done that. That was, the wrong thing. So it's hard, right? Because then people say, well, this is what I want, and you go, well, this is what I'm giving you. Knowing when to hold back is a tough thing, but it does come with experience. You're going to make mistakes. That's part of the process. We also then have to figure out how we recover from those at the same time. But that's leadership.
Absolutely. No, I think it's important as well, from my perspective at least, these things change over time anyway, different priorities, different situations might call for more sort of hand holding at various different points. Likewise, the vice versa ultimately. So yeah. There's another question here. Any advice on how to give good feedback when you're still trying to find your feet as a leader? I'm assuming this is up towards their own line manager, perhaps. Possibly not,
Or
actually.
maybe in a
Maybe it's both
one-to-one
ways.
feedback. Yeah,
Yeah,
feedback in
yeah,
any way.
yeah.
I think about this a lot. One of the biggest things for me is I've had leadership positions where I can't sleep at night because I'm obsessing over what I've said or done, and I worry, that I said the wrong thing or I did the wrong thing or I fed back the wrong thing, or maybe I didn't feed back at all, and now that's keeping me awake. Um, and something I've kind of made my peace with is I have to be able to sleep at night. So if something's keeping me awake, like that's a sign for me that I should have maybe done it differently, or maybe should have done it sooner, or I haven't been honest about what I wanted to say. Um, I think there is more value, and again, this is the thing, like right at the core of what we do at Games Leadership is about how do I be my authentic self as a leader. And these are the tools that we teach. It's like, how do I still get to say what I want and what I need and express that in a way that allows me to go to bed at night and not feel like an awful human being. And that will look different to everybody, and we need those different leaders. We need the introverts, we need the extroverts, we need all of that. So my advice here is to figure out, I guess, what it is that you are saying, what it is that you're not saying, and what feels most authentic to you. It's the no regrets tattoo for leadership. Because I think if you're speaking authentically and from an authentic place, and you'll know when you are, because that will feel good. And it's kind of getting comfortable with that. Does that make sense? Am I being too hippie?
No, I think it's good. More tattoos, I reckon.
No regrets.
No regrets tattoos. Okay, we've got one more question here. I don't want to end on a negative question, but maybe something to spin in a positive way.
Love a
Um,
negative question. Give me a negative question.
This is from somewhere. I don't think I'm qualified for my new role as a manager. Loves their team, genuinely cares about them, but is interested in advice on knowing when to step down or when to begin that process. What would you say to that person?
I mean, I've been in the entertainment industry now for nearly 20 years, and games probably just over 12 or 13. And I still don't feel qualified to do a lot of the things that I do. I don't know if that helps, or maybe that makes me a fraud. I don't know. Um, I don't know if you ever get to that stage where you're like, I am qualified, because the moment that I just can't imagine being like, I am the expert, even though, the qualifications that you hold might have it. So it's very difficult to get to that situation where you would acknowledge that you are the expert in a situation, which normally means you're a good leader, because you're not like, I know everything and I have all the answers here. So firstly, great self-awareness. Um, Something I often ask myself is, if not me, then who? So what's the alternative? Is there an alternative, in stepping down? Stepping down is a negative as well. Like we can reframe that as, uh, am I enjoying this? Is this what I want to be doing? If somebody did it better, what would that look like? Um, we talked about outsourcing earlier, are there elements of this role that I'm good at and want to keep, or are there elements of this role that actually aren't my strength and forte? And if I'm in a studio position, leadership position, then maybe that's time for a new role to kind of take over some of those positions. So I don't know, without knowing the context, I can't give my advice. But I would always go to, I don't know if anybody feels ready to lead. And again, that's the whole point of this talk is, nobody taught me how to lead. I think you'd be surprised at how many people are in the exact same situation. And so it's about evaluating, I guess, of like what's healthiest in that situation. If there are behaviors that are damaging the team, let's talk about that. Let's try and address those problems. Are you in a position where you can learn and see these issues taking place? I don't know. That's to answer the
I
question.
think I think so. Again, this is my personal opinion here. Maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but I don't think expertise is necessarily a binary measure. Really, I mean, I think it's not. You know, you can be really good at certain things, and you can be not so good at others. And maybe when you're looking around, you're only seeing you know um, the very best of everyone being on display, perhaps. And so I think it goes back to what you were saying about the that imposter syndrome. You're measuring yourself off of a sort of a yes no scale rather than a sliding scale, as it were. So and things are always in flux as well. I mean, teams, your people that you're managing change, and people come and go as well. So those things all factor into this.
I
Okay,
wonder if it's,
interesting.
I guess being an expert is actually knowing what you're not great at
That
and
is
admitting it.
very, yeah, that is very Socratean, I think, if I remember my studies correctly. So, one last question then from me. I mean, you mentioned at the top about sort of a rejection of corporate culture. Um, I wondered if you had any thoughts on the good bits, the good aspects of that sort of big corporate structure that the games industry has, or that you've seen successful leaders adopt.
Totally,
Um,
yes.
that
There's
would be
space for all
interesting.
of these things. There's space for, I'm not anti corporate structures either. There's space for the more different structures we have, the more choice there are for developers to choose where they want to work. And I really welcome that. There are people that love to work in an office, and we shouldn't just be closing down all offices and making all games making remote. That's not going to work for everybody. What I am about is options and choices. Um, and what can we take from corporate structures? Corporate structures know how to build businesses, and have been doing so. I mean, I suspect, when we look back and peel the layers of the onion uh, in the games industry, that a lot of those corporate structures started out exactly how some of the indies, we see now, where there isn't that, started from a dream of wanting to make great games in a bedroom of somebody 20, 30 years ago. We've just had a longer time for that to become something else, and it's got business expertise and people taking over and doing just that as part of it. And I realize that we don't have those kind of resources in smaller studios, but that doesn't mean we can't be interested in running a business, and taking some of those kind of business learnings and using that then to support a small business. You know, the industry has for a long time just given money for cool ideas, and I do think that's changing. I do think that investor confidence is down at the moment, and in order to bring that back up, we are going to have to show pitches that show good business decisions as well as a cool game idea. Um, and that's not unfair. That's not uh, an unreasonable ask. Um, and I think it's just getting more comfortable with, the idea that running a game studio is also running a business. Yes, you can make a cool thing, but we can take some of those structures as well and some of those learnings, which have been highly publicized and talked about for many years. And we can adapt those and bring those into our own studios and actually use those to help set us up for more success. Corporate things that help protect studios, things like policies and clarity in roles and job descriptions. Those aren't bad things to have in a small studio.
Absolutely, a bit of structure as well. It sounds good. I mean, it feeds on to another sort of question in the chat. Maybe a bit of a an update on one of the earlier questions, but definitely sort of. I mean, someone's asking essentially, how do they manage the balance between sort of managing others and also their own workload? I suppose. Yeah, I think you've probably sort of touched on some of this, but it'd be good to expand a little bit, perhaps.
Yeah, we go back to the recognize what you're good at, recognize what you're not good at, try and hand over what you're not good at to somebody who is passionate and loves that. But don't check out completely, is the answer there. I'm aware, again, though, resource can be difficult there. We're all working on shoestring budgets. Often it's not as expensive as you think. So it's worth finding out, like, what do we need? Being able to identify, I think, what you need is the step one in that question. So what does help look like? And we're often really bad at knowing that. We're often our worst critics. And do I know what I need? I don't know. But now I also have to manage the person that I brought in, and that can bring another stress. And sometimes we add to our problems rather than take away. So I think being able to communicate what you do need is kind of the first step of that, and assessing that to see if there is resource and space. But it's tough. I'm not saying it's not tough. I think there's a lot of pressures at the moment, and everybody's trying to get that work-life balance as well. There's also that question of, like, am I a creative who wants to make things, or am I a business owner? Again, those pressures are going to cause friction and rub up against one another, and sometimes we have to have that discussion, and that can lead to some hard outcomes and decisions.
Absolutely. I think this feeds perfectly onto the final question. And I think I know the answer to this one, but where would you suggest people go if they want more training in leadership or management skills?
I mean, you don't have to use us, but I'd love you to. We are gamesleadership.com. We have a 12-week leadership course already called The Blueprint. There is a free course available on the history of leadership. And we also run a scholarship program for those that need help the most. We provide accessibility and make our courses more available to those that need it. We have a free Discord that people are welcome to join and take part. We're about to revive that. It's been a bit quiet recently, but we've brought on some new members of the team to help revive it. And yeah, we're more than happy for you to reach out to me personally on LinkedIn or any of the team, and we'll answer any questions. But like I said, there's lots out there that's coming through. I guess, the stuff that we believe in is that a lot of what we're creating is from people that have lived it and are working in the games industry, and we think that that's really important, and it comes from a sort of psychological underpinning of, why are these things important, why should we talk about them? There you go.
Absolutely.
www.gamesleadership.com, please.
Wonderful. Well, be putting those links in the video recording as well, so we'll keep track of those. But yeah, thank you so much, Mel. It's been really fascinating. I think that was really interesting. So thank you so much, and thanks
My
for everyone
pleasure.
that's attended.